Okay. Welcome to Thinking Beyond. Before we get started on tonight's topic, I just want to announce our next month's topic, which is Can the Eye be considered a complex quantum sensor? And that will be with Gabriela Barreto Lemos on October 27th. And then for tonight's webinar, if you have any questions at all during the talk, just submit those using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to those questions towards the end of the hour. And so I will go ahead and turn it over to our moderator for tonight, which is the Beyond Center Director, Paul Davies.
Thank you, Jessica, and welcome everybody to the September Thinking Beyond. And as usual, we have something completely different. So it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's main presenter, Phil T., who's an old friend, but his official description, get this, he is a serial entrepreneur, inventor, active physicist, and expert in IT service assurance. Whenever I see serial as an adjective, I'm always thinking of serial murderers, but I see you can be a serial entrepreneur, and indeed he is, because he's founded and been CEO of a number of companies during his time, all of them in the IT and computer sector, and he's now executive vice president and head of AI innovations at Zscaler, which some of us might call Zscaler. There he's overseeing applications of AI to cybersecurity. He's going to be talking about that as well. But this conceals the fact that he's really a theoretical physicist. He's got a PhD in informatics and a B.Sc in physics from the University of Sussex, has 50 or more patents in the area of machine learning and fault isolation. And last but not least, he's an adjunct professor in the Beyond Center, and the two of us have been collaborating on discrete space-time theories and quantum field theory in those sorts of backgrounds. So that's rather a long and rambling introduction, but I hope it gives you the flavor of the versatility and diversity of Phil's interests. So I'm going to hand over to him to get the ball rolling for this evening. So Phil, over to you.
Awesome, and thanks, Paul. I think the last thing in all of those things is maybe just tired, because there's a lot going on, seemingly always. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here and able to talk about what is a very important subject that touches all of our lives at the moment, which is the AI wave. So I've got a few slides which I figured I would walk through to try and sort of frame the discussion, and hopefully if you can give me a thumbs up when this becomes visible. So we're good. Right. So AI, artificial intelligence. Are we looking at salvation or damnation? And I'm going to walk through a few things, and then maybe you can all make your minds up as to, where we're headed with this enormously important invention. Now, I always like to start with this picture for all sorts of reasons. I'm from a part of the world, the Midlands, South Staffordshire, which kind of embodies the "it's grim up north" sort of view of the world. It's a very post-industrial landscape, and being brought up there, the teachers would drag us to look at this wonderful thing, as a way of trying to make us feel good about coming from that part of the world. And I wonder if anybody looking at this immediately recognizes it. Do you recognize it, Paul? Oh, you're on mute there. The technology.
Right. This is is it Brunel's bridge, folding bridge?
No,
No, no.
no, no. Second guess?
Um, uh,
It flummoxes people.
no, it's a very famous bridge from the Industrial Revolution.
Spot on. It
I
is
can't remember its name. It's
the Iron Bridge,
the
Paul.
Iron Bridge. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's situated in this place called Iron Bridge Gorge. Um, that actually, as it happens, is a very, very pretty part of the world. But the significance of the Iron Bridge is it's a manufactured good. So typically, what would happen before is bridges would be essentially made on site, whereas this was precast iron beams made in a factory, a thing called a factory, and put together to create the Iron Bridge Gorge. For those of us with a minor obsession with Albert Einstein, it was built exactly 100 years before Einstein was born in 1779, so 100 years for his birth in 1879, and it stands there and is often pointed to as kind of marking the sort of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So we would be dragged there as children, saying it's grim up north, but you're lucky enough to come from where the modern world was invented. So, and of course, it represents a step change in human flourishing, or maybe a revolution. We went from learning how to handle these things, plows. We were farmers, had an agrarian economy largely before the Industrial Revolution, to having all kinds of wonderful mechanized things, where we as individuals would escape the limitations of the physical frame that we operate in. And this industrial revolution created the world in which we live. It gave us the notion of urbanized living, of salaries, of paid time off, the Enlightenment that came along with it, gave us trade unions and representative democracy in the ways in which we would think of today. And of course, you can look at it in a slightly different way and say, well, what did it do to, ordinary people? And so I can't lay claim to this beautiful graphic. This is Hans Rosling, the famous statistician, sadly no longer with us. But the graph here is a graph of health versus wealth. So what you have along the horizontal axis is average gross domestic product per person, the economic productivity of an individual, roughly correlated with how much money you have. And on the vertical axis, how long are you going to live? What's your average life expectancy? And the little dots, those are the nations of the world. The size of the dots is relative to the population, and the color gives you what continent they belong to. And the immediate observation is back in 1800, more or less roughly the kickoff of the Industrial Revolution. We led lives that were pretty much miserable, short, painful, boring. I think James Burke used to say the good old days were boring, painful, tasteless, and short. Even if you were lucky enough to be born in, say, the United Kingdom or a European country, this was true. In fact, it's a very sobering thought to think that had I been born in 1767 and not 1967, I'd already be dead. It's kind of a miserable existence. And this is what the Industrial Revolution did to us. So these numbers, 2023, may be correlative when Hans Rosling left us, shows us that the Industrial Revolution, this process, lifted the nations of the world, all of us, and we're all incredibly wealthy. And we might not think about it, but I own more automobiles than Queen Victoria ever did, and more televisions than Edward VII. So the wealth that we casually have is quite amazing. We're all educated in schools, and we're literate and very sort of highfalutin compared to our ancestors from the 18th century. And of course, we live a very long time. 80, 90 years is a hell of a lot better of a time span than what it would have been back then. So this step change is hugely significant. And of course, those of us in the AI world, we think that the wave that we're living through, generative AI, and potentially artificial general intelligence, could have almost as much an impact on us as the Industrial Revolution, maybe even more. And here's just a few samples of what could go right. I remember some years ago being sat on a plane next to a geneticist, and we got talking. She was off to a conference in Hawaii, which I thought was impossibly glamorous to go talk about things. And I said, "What are you a researcher in?" And she said, "My specialism is the genetics of aging." And I said, "Well, that's super interesting, but surely, you just wear out and get old and die, don't you?" She said, "No, no, no." She said, "Today, the first 200-year-old human being is walking planet Earth. there is somebody alive today who will live to 200. And if you just pause for a second, this could be somebody on this call. It could be me. We're not banking on it. It could be you, Paul. It could be anybody listening into this. So the question you have to ask yourself is, what are you going to do with the extra 100 years? This is if you think of how AI can improve drug discovery and genetic therapies and being able to sift through vast quantities of data to come up with novel therapeutics, that could be what comes up. We often very much in the AI world obsess around the software side of AI, but how about the physical side of AI, robotics, and the freedom that may give us from labor and the world of work? Maybe we all really are destined to leisure. With knowledge work automation, could we severely boost GDP to the point where we have a universal basic income, and the striving for a living becomes something of the past. And this is always one that I always like to comment on, the sanitization of civic life. It sort of feels like one of the direct consequences of the IT revolution is that it sort of polluted the public discourse and created post-truth and all the social media ills that we all live with. Maybe AI sanitizes all of that, and maybe one day we won't elect a president. We'll just boot up a new computer that will run us all in a way that is peaceful and best for us all. So this is maybe a brief canter through the salvation. What does that look like? But there are dark things too, in my view, and some of what is going on with generative AI is turning science fiction into fact. There's a fantastic TV program called Black Mirror. Over 10 years ago, had this episode where a young woman, her boyfriend's killed in a car crash, and she signs on to a service that brings him back from the dead into an avatar that she can, assuage her grief with. That is a market today. There is grief AI. You can sign up to any number of companies that will, allow your social media to create an avatar. You can dialogue with your dear departed, and this is kind of is almost mind blown that you can do this now. But is it a good thing? And it's a truth not often repeated in our space because we all would like to think of ourselves as super smart and deeply sophisticated. That AI is this new thing, and the truth of it is that artificial intelligence has been around as long as computers have. Alan Turing, the sometimes acknowledged father of computing, conceived of AI almost at the same time. And as you see through this graph of key events, and not trying to be exhaustive in terms of the development of AI, this stretches back into the 1940s, and even the recent Nobel Prize winning Geoffrey Hinton and co. The back propagation neural networks and the kind of the core bits of the architecture of AI is well over 50 years old, in fact. And transformer technology, which is at the heart of generative AI, I'll have a little bit more to say about that in a moment, is already 8 years old. So, this stuff has been around. So you might ask yourself, why all of a sudden Gen AI? Why are we now seeing this incredible wave of AI touching everyone's life? And of course, the techniques inside of Gen AI, statistical language learning, have been kind of flirted with for many decades as well. But it's only when the cost of compute has gotten down to the level that it dropped to in the 2010s, where a gigaflop goes down to a buck around about that point, that the transformer revolution became possible. I remember in the very early days of AI when we were training models on the 100 megaword corpus and thinking that was a lot of data. Well, that is dwarfed by comparison with modern technologies. And the funny thing is I always like to point out that this phenomenon of, the cavitation, the cost of things causing revolutions in markets, we see this everywhere in the world. And in particular, I'd like to make a shout out to The Clash and London Calling at this point, because, you could argue that the birth of punk rock, and I happen to be quite fond of punk rock, along with many other music tastes, came about because the cost of producing recording singles cavitated around about the early 1970s, which again corresponded in a massive rise in the number of people that could meet up in a pub and decide that tomorrow they were going to be rock stars. And and this is happening in AI because we can all do it now. And this is maybe one of the reasons why it is being spoken about. I don't think there are too many people that haven't tried out ChatGPT or Perplexity or Gemini or any of the or for that matter, I should also mention X.AI. All of the foundational models effectively allow you to program the AI using natural language with prompts. So you can ask it structured questions. You can ask it to build code for yourself. In fact, in the GPT 5.0 launch, Sam Altman gave a very nice demo of asking the AI model to build a very sophisticated simulation program, which would take even somebody skilled as a coder many hours to build. You can do this almost instantaneously. So you have this huge democratization of creativity that's come along with it. So it's quite amazing. So why don't we talk a little bit about what it is? Because it is both an incredibly impactful bit of technology, but at its heart, also something quite simple. A large language model, which is at the heart of generative AI, is effectively a sequence predictor. So you take a very large body of text, of language. In the case of the big generative AI models, it's the whole of the internet and then some. And you teach it about what words typically follow other words. It's the philosopher Wittgenstein's principle of you know a word by the company it keeps. So, for example, in this really silly example here, the cat sat on there, and immediately everybody has gone, Matt. The answer is Matt. What an LLM is doing is at every point in that sequence, it's producing a probability distribution over what the next word is going to be in there. So it's a sequence predictor. So in a sense, it's like having a very good friend who's always completing your sentences for you. And when you use a large language model and you ask it a question, how it's producing the answer is not by being clever in the sense that maybe most people think of as intelligence. Is it really doing reasoning? What it's doing is it's going back into its trained data sets and taking the best stab at how to complete the prompt that you give it. So an LLM is just this sequence predictor, but it's phenomenally useful. And the really curious thing about it was there was a massive gain of function obtained when they scaled up the transformer large language model systems and went from GPT-2 to GPT-3. So practically getting something done with this is prompting. Now, another one of the things that I'm a fan of is West Bromwich Albion, from that same grim part of the world that I was brought up with. And you could maybe ask a question of generative AI to reason as to whether or to think about what are the chances of West Brom getting promoted this season from the Championship. And a prompt is essentially a structured question where you give it a task, you provide it some context, maybe give it some examples of how you want the answer to be, some constraints, and a point of view to come from. So in this case here, I'm saying, the task is let me know whether or not West Brom are going to get promoted. Here's a list of starting and ending positions for the last 5 seasons for West Brom. Come at this like an Alan Hansen-esque football, maybe a Gary Lineker-esque football pundit. And I should say football in the sense of soccer, and disregard anything that Ryan Mason, the current manager of West Brom, might say because he's going to be biased. And of course, the answer he's going to give you is no. There's no chance. I do hope to eat my hat that we're going to get promoted. But when you ask these questions, and everybody's very sort of familiar with this, there's a problem with large language models that probabilistic distribution may give you the wrong answer. And this gets given a very fancy title, which is hallucination. So, it might accidentally in the example that I gave, instead of saying Matt, give you the cat sat on the salami, and that would be viewed as an hallucination. In fact, in some ways, some people, I'm one of them, think that hallucination is one of the more interesting things that large language models do. So you may hear people talking about something called RAG, which is a technique for sitting on top of LLMs to make them useful. And really, what's going on there is I mentioned that generative AI large language models are trained on a large body of text, quote unquote, the internet. But of course, this is very expensive. It costs many tens of millions, occasionally hundreds of millions of dollars to train a foundational model. It takes time, so they don't do it the whole time. They batch this up and release updates to the model, every 6 months or whatever it might be. And so there is a date beyond which it doesn't know anything. So, for example, if you were to take a model that had a training cutoff date of the 1st of January of this year, or maybe the 1st of November of last year, and ask it who the president of the United States is, it would respond very faithfully, Joe Biden. So if you're wanting to build an application using generative AI that is maybe, I don't know, generating political punditry or something, you need to escape this training cutoff and deal with hallucinations like getting the president wrong by providing more context. And the way in which that works is you take the user question, the prompt, and then you enrich that by pulling back data from elsewhere. So you might pull back, recent copies of the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or Breitbart. Vectorized, which means given an index on presidential election results, and you would fit that into a very large prompt, give that to the LLM, and it would give you magically now the answer: President Donald Trump is the president of the US. And these prompts, these questions that you can ask, and particularly when they're generated in this kind of programmatic way, can be very big. The early transform models, like BERT, could only deal with 512 tokens. Loosely, it's not true to think of it this way, 2 or 3 tokens per word. So that kind of gives you how long the sentence could be. Llama, one of the Mistral models, the latest releases can accept 10 million tokens, which is basically a book in being put in there. So this is phenomenally useful. You may have heard of people talking about agentic AI or AI agents. And this is the next kind of evolution of this approach of automatically expanding questions, where now you have these agents, and all an agent is a program that has access to a large language model and a series of tools that allow it to go and retrieve information from specific sources, and a very special agent called a planner that when you give it a question, it kind of figures out the steps that it needs to answer the question and then delegates tasks out to other agents. So in a sense, you have kind of Skynet. You have agents talking to agents, which is really models talking to models, all collaborating together to try and answer very complex questions. And you can do phenomenally interesting things with these. So in my day job at Zscaler, we're very interested in how we use this to automate very complicated tasks of analyzing security issues and remediating them, as an example. And these are tasks that would require individuals that are very experienced to do, that can now be significantly sped along by automating with these things. And the planners have become hugely sophisticated. The range of data that you can access has become very wide. There are emerging standards around how you can share this, so you end up with meshes of maybe potentially hundreds or thousands of these agents. And the entire internet, the entire state of the universe becomes your context, your question that you ask the prompt. And of course, this is continuously evolving. This is just the latest in the wave of how people do things with AI. So where does this go next? What do we think in the industry is going to be interesting? So this transformer technology, which is the heart of uh, the heart of these generative AI tools, all going back to a paper in 2017 called Attention is All You Need, which is a very neat way of encoding the relationships between words. They're nearly 10 years old. So maybe, there's going to be some novel new types of models that are going to come out. We had a bit of a shock at the start of the year with a thing called DeepSeek, which came out of China, and it reduced the training cost. Remember, I said about this $100 million to train a model by almost 95%. So it was a phenomenal reduction. Um, you may hear people make reference to things called AI winters, and what on earth's one of those? Well, this industry's been around a long time. When I was going through university, uh, first time round, um, what people were doing with AI was really expert systems. They were writing things in formal logic. They were trying to deduce the grammar, the syntax of English language and encode that with languages that are very adept at being able to assert formal logic. And we're starting to see people hybridize statistical, which is the generative AI style approaches, and these formal logic approaches to try and further guardrail down the scope for hallucinations. Then there's this, I don't know, all recovering physicists, I think, in the AI space always look slightly askance at this kind of throwaway term of it's all linear algebra. Of course, the linear algebra, matrices and systems of equations is all part of that. But, it's really maths, not math. My big bone contention with my adoptive homeland's tortured use of the English language from time to time is to incorrectly shorten the demonym of mathematics to math. There's lots more to it than just Pythagoras' theorem. And I think we might be able to really burst beyond the capabilities of some of these AI models by using all kinds of interesting techniques from more advanced algebraic geometry, being able to represent neural networks as continuous fields rather than collections of weights. And of course, quantum is apparently coming. I think people have varying different views as to the reality of that. And so, we're in this crazy wave at the moment of generative AI. People are very excited about it, but maybe this is just one stop on this continual evolution, continual revolution in AI technology, and the cycle may just continue repeating, getting more and more astounding. So we do need to worry about the pitfalls of generative AI. And one of the ones that really doesn't get spoken about often enough is the ecological consequences of this. So, when you train one of these large language models, it costs a lot of energy. Uh, People are building data centers that are sucking all of the power out of our grid, and oftentimes all of the water out of our rivers to cool them down. Um, Versus the humble human brain, which is ticking along at half a kilowatt hour a day, doing amazing things, often outsmarting these phenomenal intelligences. And I often point to that and say, well, that is your existence proof, if you like, that AI isn't really genuinely intelligent because it's having to burn a lot of megawatts to, be caught out by questions like, what is the capital of the country that borders France and Germany, which early versions of ChatGPT would routinely get wrong. Um, Bias and safety. Uh, Along with The Clash, I'm also a very big fan of David Bowie. And a very early album of his, The Man Who Sold the World, has a track on it called The Savior Machine, with the immortal line in it, you can't stake your life, or you shouldn't stake your life on the Savior Machine. And one of the problems with AI is it's so good that people are arguably overly reliant on the output. And there are many other examples of IP being accidentally intellectual property being accidentally leaked into models because people use it to fix their problems in code, and that gets incorporated into the training. Who do you blame when it gets the wrong answer? There are many examples of people being incorrectly accused and tried of things even because AI gave misleading answers to questions. And the other thing with generative AI being trained on, the sum of human knowledge is, for the most part, human beings were pretty beastly through history. So, our literature, our language is full of inbuilt bias, discrimination, misogyny, racism, all of the stuff which cheapens our existence. And of course, all of that is in the models. So you have to be very, very careful to make sure that any applications that use this, you balance the bias that's there. And I work for a cybersecurity company, so I have to say that one of the things that you should be really a genuine and real threat is AI is both a tool for in the hands of the good people trying to protect cyberland, but it's also a tool in the hands of the bad actors, and we're seeing deep fake technology of astounding uh, credibility, where they're creating videos, so video calls that purport to be people to conduct phishing attacks, and we need to up our game to be able to spot those. The whole yeah, use of AI to go and help you design an attack. You can go to ChatGPT today and ask it to give you vulnerabilities. In fact, you might need an uncensored model to properly do that. So you need to worry about security, and we worry about it a lot at Zscaler on our customers' behalf. And we have an approach which we sometimes refer to as zero trust, which we think is even more appropriate in the world of AI, where you've got AI agents that don't have a moral compass interacting with the world. So, just to finish the setup for the conversation, AI is definitely changing the world. I mean, it is an amazing. The last 2 or 3 years have been breakneck speed, but my assertion is we still have a long way to go before we work out whether or not it's saved us or damned us. Um, Everybody should be experimenting because you can. But please don't assume it's infallible. And if you're out there thinking of using AI to write your homework assignment, by the way, it's very easy to spot when that happens. So do your own thinking. Uh, and, worry about security. Um, think hard about how you secure your environments because it's even more important today than it was before. So I'll pause there, Paul. And thank you for everybody for listening. That's where I am in terms of my take on the subject.
Um, thank you, Phil, for a very thought-provoking presentation. At some stage, we're going to bring Sarah Walker into the conversation, but meanwhile, there's some questions that have come flooding in. And one of them you just touched on briefly, and this is from Barbara Temple, asking about AI in an academic setting and students cheating for essays and so on. You said it's very easy to spot, but I think we're all struggling to know, quite what to do, whether we should encourage students to use AI, but be upfront about it, and how we separate the positive uses
Yeah.
from the negative uses. Do you have any tips on we at the cutting edge of AI in education, how we should deal with it?
Yeah, so I mean, it is changing how assessment happens. Funnily enough, on the weekend I was doing a high school tour for one of my daughters, and the humanities teacher said it very well, which is, you know, um, they're having to do examinations that are, basically you have to check your phone at the door and your watch at the door, and this is done in the absence of any supervised and proctored in person, because I think we can't anymore trust it to complete chance that people are not going to fall into the trap. um, but I'm kind of minded of the comments around I remember calculators coming in, and everybody said, "Well, you're going to all grow up to be useless at maths because calculators are going to teach you, that you don't need to know how to calculate the square root of seven in your head." Of which there are many, many tips and tricks for doing this kind of thing. And of course, it's nonsense. It's another tool, and I think one of the most exciting things about AI is it's going to speed the job of science because, our ability to do literature surveys, to prototype and try out ideas, it's going to speed development of software. It's going to speed the creation of content. I think it's an aid. But undoubtedly, I think in the professional academic world, we're perhaps behind the curve in terms of tools to help you spot that kind of plagiarism, which is what it is when you're passing off the work of an LLM as your own. But that's catching up. I think the technology will wipe its own brow, which is the politer way of saying what I could have said.
Bob also raises a disturbing thing I didn't know about, that there is a new premium service with ChatGPT where instead of you going to it to help you with a problem, it's proactive and it basically contacts you and prompts you for some sort of action or answer. It means it's sort of intruding into your private life in some way that I think a lot of people find alarming. Do you know anything about this and what can we do about it? Because it does sound a little bit like Big Brother.
We could always not sign up for the service, I think is the short answer. But this kind of proactive AI agent or personal avatar, if you will, gain is an idea that goes back quite a long way. There's a very famous another David Bowie interview to YouTube 20 odd years ago where he predicted this. I think James Burke, again, in one of his connections series, talked about it quite a lot. The idea that, instead of you having to remember that it's Mother's Day, the AI contacts you and says, it's Mother's Day, Phil. It's time to go think about what you're going to get your mum. And by the way, this is what you did for the last 5 years, and this is what I think would go down well. And I've looked at her, Facebook. She doesn't have a Facebook profile. I looked at her Facebook profile and decided that, she wants to go skydiving at the tender age of 89. So I booked those lessons for you. So you can imagine it being a positive in the sense of lifting some of the day-to-day burden of information wrangling that people do all the way along. But there is an absolutely legitimate concern around the boundary of privacy and agency that AI could quite easily break for us. And, I think there is a debate to be had about, where we set the boundaries to this. But, we didn't have that debate for social media. And look where that got us. And I maybe take a pessimistic view that I don't think we'll have this debate either.
Right, right. And there are, of course, lonely people who become psychologically dependent
Yeah.
on AI, and that's sad. But I suppose throughout history there have been people who have personality problems that need addressing. So we'll move on to some other questions. We've got quite a lot here, and there's one from Daniel Simmons that I often think.
Mm.
Because these large language models, as you say, just sort of probabilistic, they just pick the, plausible next word and so on. They're not really doing, as it were, original thinking.
Mm.
And I'm going to paraphrase the way Daniel puts it, that I've often wondered if you, maybe you can do this now as an experiment, if you give AI all of the information about planetary movements, including the perihelion precession of Mercury, and it knows about Newtonian mechanics, would it actually come up with general relativity? In other words, change the entire conceptual basis of the scientific explanation. I can understand it being a sort of epicycle generator that you can tweak here and tweak there, but is it going to come up with something conceptually fundamentally new? That interests me.
Yeah.
I'm skeptical that what we have at the moment is anywhere near that. But what do you think?
Yeah, I'm skeptical too. And it kind of boils down to a really very difficult question to answer, which kind of sounds like what is intelligence or what is creativity? What is sentience? And, is a computer capable of doing it? We don't really know how to define it ourselves. Um, but the thing about a neural network or a large language model is it's a massive function a massive function discovery engine, if you like. 1.7 trillion parameters. I think ChatGPT 5 now is arguably 50 trillion parameters. You imagine, if you have a 50 trillionth order polynomial, you can fit that to any massive collection of data points. But have you understood anything about the data? Or have you just found a way of representing it in a non-reductive kind of way? And of course, it's phenomenally difficult to test this with current technologies because the only real way in which you could test it is, I don't know, say, come up with a theory of quantum gravity, knowing everything that you know about science as of Monday, September the 9th at, 6 p.m., 6:40 p.m., Pacific Daylight Savings Time. And if it came back with an equation where we all stood back and go, well, why didn't we think of that? That's obvious. It explains everything. Then clearly it is being novel and intelligent. But I don't think it's ever going to do that in the technology that it has. There's some of the approaches to this, which I think might be interesting. And of course, people talk about marrying quantum with AI as a way of doing it, but thinking very differently about what it means to train a network. So I was sat at a dinner between an expert on AI and a psychologist who was an expert in kindness. So his whole shtick was understanding why human beings do nice things, why we help old ladies across the road and give somebody a last roller, if you remember that advert. And he has this whole theory about it's kind of a lateral optimization that people are doing. And on the other hand, AI is a linear optimization. They're very selfish. They're trained to optimize an objective function. So could you build a kind artificial intelligence? Could you encode the idea of doing something just so inside of an AI to build a kind AI which might be non-linear? The other one, which may be a little bit more mathsy, is that thing I mentioned earlier on about continuous neural networks. So instead of learning all of these parameters, the weights in some massive matrix of numbers that encodes the knowledge in an AI, that you think of them as points in some sort of electromagnetic field, say, for example. And the training is designing the strengths of all of those points in a continuous way. And then if you decided to do, and people have done that, by the way, and that works, but then you use something more exotic that's non-linear as a way of doing that, that might create sort of unexpected jumps in reasoning, which is maybe one of the characteristics of human intelligence. And all of
Well,
these things are possibilities that we could explore.
and I'm toggling between sort of social implications and technical points. And there's a technical question that may relate to what you just said, but I don't know because I don't understand it. This is from Mariano. Is there a more principled way of including uncertainty in transformers, more generalized RL and
Before
JPA-like Arch from Jan
the
LeCun?
coup. Yeah.
Well, I don't know what I'm saying. These are words. But does it relate to what you just said?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going, and of course, I mean, it was I mean, this observation goes back quite a long way. That introducing randomness with what are called bias nodes, random bias nodes into a neural network improves the efficiency with which they learn and predict. And this is kind of a little bit peculiar because instead of sort of determining what the value of a neuron is in this neural network, you just randomly assign it, and it seems to do quite a nice job. And that's definitely something which people are experimenting with. And there's also an aspect of this as well, which, maybe it's a little bit uncomfortable as a practitioner in this space that, if you think about the architecture of, state-of-the-art neural networks in large language models, there is a degree of arbitrariness with them. Like there's a genuine sort of design principle that is at play, but the precise mechanics of how big your dimension of the spaces that you're embedding your representation of words in versus how many layers of hidden neural network layers and transform heads and so on and so forth that you have. There's no science that gives you those numbers. There's a lot of experimentation that gives you that. And so, maybe we'll stumble across the right way to introduce novelty into these things.
I'd like to bring in Sarah, who's now able to join us. We do have a lot of other questions, but Sarah, go ahead if you've got some thoughts and questions for Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I mean, I have lots of questions, but I don't want to take up too much space because I think I was reading some of the questions in the chat and they're great. But I think one of the things that I really want to understand is sort of how much we're talking about AI right now is centered on the economics of AI versus the reality of AI. And even the fact that we talk about AI as like a monolithic singular thing when it's really a whole suite of technologies is deeply interesting. And like the same kind of model, that underlies ChatGPT might underlie protein folding, but we don't think it's intelligent when it's protein folding, and we think it's intelligent when it's doing human language. So I guess it's just a landscape of, like how much of it is driven by the tech sector trying to sell products versus, what we actually academically understand of these. And do you think that ecosystem will change as people start to understand these technologies and on what time scale?
Yeah, I mean, Sarah, it's undoubtedly driven by the tech industry wanting to sell lots of things, and
Yes.
given the rate at which these companies consume capital, they need to sell a lot of things
Mhm.
to turn a profit. Which, at the end of the day, these are not charities; they're trying to make money. So yeah, and I think that if you watch some of the commentary around, from the leaders of these businesses, they're definitely some of them are indulging in fear-based PR. Oh, we must have an immediate sort of, United Nations sponsored conference on how to avoid, the singularity where, humankind is going to cease to exist. I mean, it's bullshit, if I can use that word. But it's not going to be either extreme. Um, and you're right. I mean, I think in terms of the academic understanding, the why do they work as opposed to how do they work, I think that is very much white space today. People don't really understand the why quite as much as you might think.
Can we move to another question?
Yeah, I think we
And we'll
should
bring
go to
it
the Q&A for sure.
I'm
Yeah,
going to
there's a lot.
bundle two
Thanks,
together,
Phil.
one from Henry,
That was
one
great.
from Lance, because these are both citing, as it were, scaremongers. One relates to the Walmart CEO saying about 50% of jobs will get the chop because of AI, and the other from Lance talking about Richard Sutton's argument that LLMs are just a dead end and won't get us to AGI. So, is it taking over the world or is it just
It's a bit of
uh,
both. I mean, the Richard Sutton, the man himself with a bitter lesson, right? Is one of the folks really saying, people are confusing large language models with intelligence. But let's deal with the sociological stuff. Um, so back to the Industrial Revolution thing, uh, and one of the ways in which I think you recognize that kind of event in human history is where you have a generational dissonance. So, if you imagine Amos in the field in 1750 having a conversation with Amos the Fourth in a factory somewhere in Smethwick, Amos in the field wouldn't understand how Amos the Fourth in the factory led their lives. What do you mean you live in a house in a city and get paid a salary? None of that would make any sense. You stand there and you pull levers on a machine. I mean, where's the plow in that? And in a sense, that kind of dislocation is because there was a revolution. And for sure, I think we are going through a stage where we may not understand how our grandchildren make their livings. An office job as a lawyer may not exist in 2 generations' time. A job as a primary care physician may be unrecognizable in 2 generations' time. Software engineers may not exist in 2 generations' time. They may be doing a very different job. Now, does that mean there's going to be mass unemployment? No. It means the jobs are going to change. And, usually the lesson of these things is, Amos the fourth in the factory is leading a better life than Amos in the field. And, our descendants, because of AI, will probably be, I'm a natural optimist, will probably be enriched by the technology and do things that we would never dream of and lead gilded existence by comparisons to us. But in between, there is undoubtedly going to be a lot of distress. Although I will say, CEOs love an excuse to cut costs.
Right. Well, there's another aspect. It's raised by one of our audience, Shashank, which touches on something that I have been bothered about. And I think anybody in the academic world will have recognized that we're receiving a very large number of email messages, grant applications, papers, and so on that seem to just be AI generated. There may be a human being somewhere in the mix. But when it gets to the stage that AI is into everything, how can we tell, whether something emanates from a human or non-human? Do we care? Does it really matter? And is there a way? I mean, this is a very specific question of, as it were, trademarking or watermarking something as, genuinely by human intelligence, like the silversmith of old, who put their stamp on their product as a quality control.
Yeah.
What do you say about that?
Yeah, invisible digital watermarking is a technology. And when I said that, the technology will catch up with being able to spot automatically generated content, arguably it already is caught up or catching up. And I think that the scope for this auto-generated content being invisible as auto-generated content is probably, not going to survive the next few years of evolutions in the tech. So tooling will improve your ability to spot when something is fake. Um, and it's probably easier to spot something as fake than it is to spot something as genuine. But
But
there you go.
I have to wonder, whether it matters. So if, for example, a research paper is written by AI and refereed by AI, and found to be fine and published, is it obviously going to be any worse than the sort of 90% of drivel that does make its way into
Well,
research publications these days?
isn't it the case that, written by a human, reviewed by a human, read by nobody?
Yes. All right, so we have a question from Mariana about we should use AI in education in a rationale as in Popper Deutsch way. So this is Karl Popper, the philosopher, David Deutsch, the founder of quantum computing by some definition. So maybe we can exchange the role of the AI students and educator doing problem finding, conjecture, criticism, etc. So it's sort of related to the last question. Does it matter? Should we just to invert the sequence here?
Yeah. And I think, well, I hope I'm not unique in saying this, that I mean, this is an interaction methodology that I use with AI. So if you have an idea and you're not lucky enough to, have somebody steeped in the subject to have a debate with to try and refine your thinking, work out whether or not you're being crazy, actually, the foundational model is pretty good for that. And you can imagine that in a classroom context, being able to adapt around the student, the learning path. COVID, introduced a lot of people to homeschooling. So people had to deal with educating their children, which might have come as a bit of a shock to some people to have to deal with that. But here's one of the things, it challenged the traditional classroom model of education in a way that I don't think has been challenged quite as deeply before. And a lot has been written about the negative consequences of it. and not much about the positive consequences of it, where you have, individual one-on-one learning with the student, accelerating their ability to, essentially learn at their own rate wherever is optimum for them. You can imagine AI being able to design custom classes for an individual that maximizes their rate of learning. And maybe, that's the inversion there that could come about.
So there's a question from Patrick that I'm going about whether there's going to be some sort of permanent damage to society or to education and so on. You touched on that, with calculators and spell checks and things doesn't mean that we've become diminished. But if you take a longer term view, and I think I'm right about this, that the human brain over the last 20, 30,000 years has shrunk, I think, in physical volume. But I think a lot of the tasks that humans did got outsourced, to dogs, for example, dogs and horses. That there are things that we don't need to be quite so good at because we've got other ways of extending. What would this be called? The extended phenotype or something. And our brains simply relinquish those aspects. So if we live long enough with AIs, it won't just be a question of, well, I could do it if I had to, but it will get to the stage where evolution would simply rewire our brains to not bother with this unnecessary tasks. Okay. Is that going to happen over a longer period than we've been talking about?
Does it make us less smart because we outsource stuff to dogs? Or does it make us smarter that we've learned to outsource things to dogs?
Right. And so I'm just thinking that do we regard, what does it mean to be human? Just as we can say, well, that extends to our pets and other things around us. Is it going to extend into the AI realm? I don't think. Do we even have a word for the community of AIs or something?
Intelligences, the community intelligences.
The something sphere. I mean, it's like the noosphere, but it's extending beyond the human brain, and maybe that makes us greater. That extends us into a bigger realm rather than diminishes us. It sort of works both ways. I'm just rambling on here. I should, Sarah, if there's anything else you'd like to say, we're running out of time. We have still a couple of questions.
No, just a point on the last comment that I think I agree. It's kind of interesting because if you think about niche construction as a mechanism for increasing complexity, we're basically making the environment around us more intelligent. So I don't understand, I don't think that there's really many evolutionary models that would make us stupider by proxy. I think it would actually enhance the average intelligence of a human to have more intelligence in the environment it's interacting with. But I guess time will tell what happens.
And it'll mold our intelligence, Sarah. I think
Yes,
that's
exactly. Yeah. It's always coevolution.
So
Yeah.
we have Anonymous, who's asking what will happen to all the people who refuse to go along with building this brave new world. And it does touch upon what I was just saying, that we can imagine this sort of wonderful neurosphere out there. There'll be people who say, I don't want any part of that. Are these going to become, hippies living in the outback, in
we
the Refuseniks, in colonies?
we didn't mention with the Industrial Revolution the Luddites.
Not a lot.
I live very close to the part of the US that is famous for the Amish community. And there are people who choose to live outside of modernity. And I think it's a very human choice. I think there's just very conscious, another question there that I saw in the thing, Paul, that I thought was very related, which was Aman Sawhney's question, which is what happens when there's an absence of strife in your life? Is that the thing that makes us human, overcoming obstacles and being part of the change and the flux of it all?
Well, many questions. We have run out of time. I've been looking at the clock on my desk, which is slow, but the clock on my computer says 6:59. And of course, I trust the computer. And and of course, you've given us a lot to think about. So I'm just going to conclude by saying to our loyal audience, come back in 1 month and we're going to have something, again, completely different, the eye as some sort of quantum sensor. And otherwise, it just remains for me to thank you, Phil, and Sarah, for being part of this fascinating conversation. And everybody else, see you in a
Yeah.
month.
Thanks so much, Phil. That was great. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Goodbye.